you wake to the smell of salt and gunpowder. Charleston Harbor glows with the faintest light of dawn, a gray that trembles between night and morning, peace and war. The gulls have fled inland. The tide moves slower than usual, as if even the sea is holding its breath. You stand on the battery wall, coat pulled tight against the damp air, and look out toward the small island of stone that will soon be famous, Fort Sumter. The fort sits silent in the middle of the harbor, its flag still raised high, stubborn against the wind. Around you, the city stirs like a beast half awake. Men whisper, rifles glint. Horses stamp nervously on cobblestone streets, slick with night mist. No one quite knows who fired first. They only know the order had been given. At 4:30 a.m., a single shell arcs through the dark and bursts above the fort like a star that has lost its way. Then the sky opens. Cannon after cannon roar from every side of the harbor. Fort Moultrie, Sullivan's Island, Cummings Point, each blast shaking the windows of the city, each echo chasing itself across the water until the world becomes one endless thunder. You feel it in your chest before you understand it. The sound, the tremor, the birth of something vast and terrible. You don't cheer. You don't even breathe. You only listen to the sound of a nation splitting apart. You had grown up believing the Union was a kind of church, imperfect, perhaps, but sacred. Your father had fought in 1812. Your brother traded cotton to New Orleans. Your cousin lived somewhere near Richmond, and you always said the war of words in Washington would never reach the dinner tables of ordinary men. But now, as the sky above Charleston turns red from the cannon's glare, you realize how wrong you were. The people around you shout. Hats fly into the air. Bells ring from the church towers, as if announcing a wedding. But the sound is all wrong. It's not joy, it's fever. It's the thrill of something irreversible. And you know it. You know that once blood is spilled, no prayer can unspill it. By midday, smoke covers the harbor like a veil. The fort answers back, a few shots, thin and desperate. Its guns are old, its walls unready. You can see the American flag still waving defiantly through the haze, and something deep inside you aches. You tell yourself this is a battle for honor, for sovereignty, for the rights of your state. But another voice, quieter and older, whispers that this is the sound of brothers turning their guns toward each other. You walk the streets of Charleston that evening and see the faces of your neighbors glowing in lamplight. They talk of victory, of independence, of a southern nation finally free from the grip of Washington. But beneath their pride, you sense a tremor, a strange unease they do not yet recognize. You pass a woman leaning from a balcony, pressing a handkerchief to her lips. Her husband is among the gunners on Sullivan's Island. Her son, barely 16, has lied about his age and joined the volunteers. You glance up, and she looks at you, eyes glistening in the dark. She doesn't speak, but her face says what no speechmaker dares to say aloud. May God forgive us for what we have begun. The bombardment lasts 34 hours. 34 hours of thunder and flame, of stone walls cracking and shells screaming through the smoke. You stand on the docks with hundreds of others, faces streaked with sweat and ash, watching the fort crumble piece by piece. By the second day, the roof of the barracks catches fire. The flag still waves, charred at the edges. You feel pride and sorrow tangled like roots inside your chest. And then, near noon on April 13th, the flag falls. A collective gasp rises from the crowd. The guns cease, the echo fading slowly until even the sea seems silent again. Somewhere behind you, a man begins to sing Dixie. Others join in, their voices ragged but loud, and for a moment, you cannot tell whether it is a song of triumph or mourning. That night, the city explodes in celebration. Torches flare along Meeting Street. Bands play until their instruments crack from the salt air. Men drink to a new nation, to Jefferson Davis, to destiny. But when you look up at the stars, you can't find the North Star anymore. It's hidden behind the smoke. You think of friends in Boston, in Philadelphia, in the wide northern cities where factories hum and children run barefoot through the soot. You wonder if they too are standing under the same dim sky, listening to distant echoes of war and asking themselves what has just been lost. You return home, boots coated in ash. You wash your face and see black water running down the basin like spilled ink. Your hands shake. You tell yourself it's just exhaustion. But deep down, you know it's fear, not of dying, but of living long enough to see what comes next. The next morning, the newspapers call it a glorious victory. They print the names of the officers, the weight of the cannons, the number of shots fired. They do not print the name of the flag keeper who died trying to save the banner before surrender. They do not mention the birds that fell dead into the harbor, wings singed from the heat. You sit by the window, the paper trembling in your hands, and read the words that will define the years to come. The war has begun. The sentence looks so small in print, so harmless, but you know better. You've seen the sky catch fire. You've felt the earth tremble. You know what a beginning costs. A week later, you watch the Union flag raised again, not in triumph, but in warning. President Lincoln has called for 75,000 volunteers to preserve the Union. Across the South, more states secede. Across the North, young men line up to enlist. Some are shouting, laughing, full of patriotic fever. Some are pale and silent. All of them are walking towards something they cannot yet imagine. You wonder if they understand that war is not glory. It has the slow unweaving of everything familiar, the sound of boots where laughter used to be, the smell of gunpowder where bread once baked, the hollow silence where a loved one's voice should be. By May, Charleston's harbor is quiet again, but the quiet feels wrong, like the pause before a storm. You look at Fort Sumter's broken walls, blackened and scarred, and think of it not as a fortress, but as a mirror. You see your country reflected in its ruin, proud, divided, and burning from within. You think of the men in Washington and Richmond, each claiming to fight for freedom. You think of the families that will soon learn the difference between a cause and the grave. And you whisper a prayer, though you're not sure who it's for, the Union, the Confederacy, or simply the souls of those who will soon be lost to both. And as the tide rises again, the salt wind stinging your eyes, you feel it at last. The strange, silent certainty that history has already chosen its path. You are only one of millions now swept into its current. And though the cannons have gone quiet for the moment, you can still hear them. A low, distant heartbeat echoing across the water, marking the rhythm of a nation at war with itself. You march before dawn, boots sinking into the Tennessee mud. The air smells of rain and iron. Somewhere ahead, through the fog, you hear the rumble of drums, steady, patient, like a giant's heartbeat. Shiloh. The word has a sacred ring to it. In Hebrew, it means place of peace, but there is nothing peaceful about this place. You carry a musket that feels heavier with every mile. The barrel is slick with dew and sweat. Around you, men cough, stumble, curse softly under their breath. None of you have slept more than an hour. You are 20 years old and already feel ancient. Then the world splits open. The first volley erupts from the trees. The air tears apart. You see leaves explode into flame, soil leap into the air, men fall without a sound. The line wavers. Someone screams that the rebels are upon you, and suddenly you are firing blindly into the smoke. The musket bucks against your shoulder. You smell powder and blood and wet wool. Time loses meaning. You reload and fire, until your fingers blister and the barrel glows faintly hot. The smoke is so thick it feels like breathing through cloth. When the bugle calls retreat, you stumble backward through bodies that no longer look human. Some still move, whispering for water. You have none left. That night, the rain returns. It washes the blood into the creeks, into the Tennessee River, turning it the color of rust. You sit beneath a tree and listen to the wounded moan in the darkness. The frogs do not sing. The stars are gone. You wonder if God is too. At dawn, you see the field, acres of torn earth and broken men. Horses lie twisted like roots, their eyes clouded and still. You count none of it. You only look for familiar faces and find one, a boy named Eli from Ohio, who once shared his bread with you. Half his face is gone. You touch his sleeve, then look away. There are too many to bury. They call it a victory. You wonder for whom. By autumn, you are in Maryland, Antietam Creek, September 1862. The cornfields stand high and golden, waiting for harvest, but the harvest will be of men. You march at dawn through mist so thick it seems alive. Cannon fire flashes ahead, lighting the fog from within like summer lightning. When the order comes to advance, you walk into the field and the stalks begin to twitch and fall as if cut by an invisible scythe. The noise is beyond sound now. It's vibration, pressure, a storm made of iron. You keep walking because the man beside you keeps walking. When he falls, you don't stop. Hours later, the sun burns through the smoke, and you see what remains. Rows upon rows of blue and gray tangled together, as if the earth itself tried to braid them before swallowing them whole. You step over them carefully, whispering apologies to strangers. You think of their mothers. That night, someone reads a letter aloud by candlelight. News that President Lincoln has issued something called the Emancipation Proclamation. You do not yet understand its full weight, only that it means the war is no longer just for Union, but for freedom. The word feels heavy and bright at the same time, like a new coin in the palm of a beggar. You wonder how many more must die before it shines. Winter comes. You are camped outside Fredericksburg, Virginia. Snow on the tents, ice on the river. Men huddle around small fires, coughing, singing low songs of home. You write letters you cannot finish. You receive one from your sister, telling you the harvest failed, that father's hands shake too much to plow. You fold it carefully and place it near your heart, as if warmth might protect it. When the attack comes, it is madness. You climb the slope toward Maury's Heights, where Confederate rifles wait behind a stone wall. The air shatters again and again. Men drop in lines so straight they look like harvested grain. You fall once, rise, fall again. You drag yourself behind a dead mule and wait for darkness. The smell of powder burns your throat. You see a hand, severed white as porcelain, lying on the frozen ground beside you, and you realize it could be yours. When night finally comes, the moans begin, thousands of them, carried by the cold wind across the Rappahannock. You press your hands to your ears, but it doesn't stop the sound inside your skull. You whisper, "No victory is worth this." The next morning, truce flags flutter weakly along the lines. Men from both sides step out to gather the dead. You watch a Confederate soldier and a Union boy lift the same body, one by the shoulders, one by the feet, and carry it to a shallow grave. They do not speak. When they finish, they nod once, a brief, silent understanding, and return to their armies. You realize in that moment that the war is not fought between good and evil. It is fought between men who look too much alike to be enemies. Months later, as spring returns, you are older, harder, quieter. You've seen enough death to last a dozen lifetimes, yet the war goes on. You hear rumors of great battles to come. Gettysburg, Vicksburg, names that sound like tolling bells. You no longer cheer when the band plays. You clean your rifle by habit, not conviction. But sometimes in the hush before dawn, you remember the world before the guns, the smell of rain on plowed fields, the laughter from a porch, your mother's hand brushing dust from your sleeve. Those memories come like ghosts now, soft and accusing. You wonder if they will still exist when the war is over, or if the war will teach the nation to forget the sound of its own heart. You close your eyes. The drums begin again. You are standing in a field in South Carolina, barefoot in the cold dawn, when you hear the news. The overseer's horse gallops past the cabins, hooves drumming like thunder on the frozen ground. You do not look up. You have learned that nothing good comes from a white man's haste. But this time, the shouting is different. It carries a strange note, a tremor of disbelief. The word reaches you at sundown, carried from mouth to mouth, whispered through the fields like a breeze before rain. Freedom. You do not know if it is a lie. You have heard lies before, about armies coming, about deliverance near at hand. But tonight, the voices do not fade. They grow. The elders gather around the fire and say the president himself has signed a paper, a proclamation. They say it declares every slave in the rebel states free. You repeat the word quietly, afraid it might break. Free. You do not sleep that night. You listen to the forest instead, to the wind brushing through the pines, to your own heartbeat. You wonder if freedom has a sound, or if it comes in silence, like a breath drawn after too many years underwater. Weeks later, Union troops arrive. They come not as saviors, but as men, tired, hungry, coated in the dust of war. You watch them from behind the trees, unsure whether to run or kneel. One of them sees you, raises his hand, and says simply, "You're free now." The words fall between you like a bridge and a chasm at once. You do not know what to do with them. Freedom is not a key. It is a door that swings open into nothing you've ever seen. You follow the soldiers anyway. You walk barefoot behind their wagons, carrying nothing but a sack of cornmeal and your mother's rosary. Every mile feels like crossing an invisible border. By the time you reach Beaufort, your feet bleed, but your back no longer bends. You begin to work for the Union Army, clearing roads, loading wagons, cooking for men who once looked at you with pity, and now with something like respect. You hear talk of a regiment made of colored men, the 54th Massachusetts. You see them march one morning, blue coats shining in the sun, their muskets gleaming like new hope. For the first time, you feel that freedom has a face, and it looks like yours. But freedom, you learn, has a price. At Fort Wagner, many of those men fall. You hear the stories from the wounded who return, of sand-soaked red, of cannon fire that swallowed the sea, of bravery met with silence. You listen, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the horizon. The flag they carried still flies somewhere out there, torn but upright. You promise yourself you will live to see it wave in peace. You are a woman in a white apron, hands raw from washing blood-soaked linen. The field hospital stretches across a meadow outside Gettysburg, the air heavy with the stench of death and carbolic acid. Flies swarm. The groans never stop. You move between the cots, changing bandages, pouring water into cracked lips. You no longer cry when you see a face torn open. You have learned to look at wounds the way farmers look at storms, as things that come and must be endured. A boy grabs your wrist. His eyes are bright with fever. "Did we win?" he whispers. You want to tell him yes. You want to tell him something that will let him go gently. But you have seen too many victories that look like this. Fields of corpses, flags shredded, mothers waiting by empty doors. So instead, you smooth his hair and say, "Rest now. You've done enough." He exhales once, softly, like a candle going out. You stand there a moment longer, staring at his face, trying to remember what color his eyes were before the fever turned them gray. Outside, the hills are still littered with bodies. The July sun bakes them until the air turns thick and sweet. You look at the horizon and think of all the letters you have written for dying men, the ones who could not hold a pen. You've written the same words 100 times. He was brave. He thought of home. He loved you. You know it is not always true, but truth has little comfort left to give. Now you are back in blue, a soldier again, older, thinner, eyes hollowed by smoke and hunger. You have fought for 2 years and feel no closer to understanding what any of it means. The talk in camp is that the war will end soon, that General Grant has taken command and will bring the hammer down. You clean your rifle and think of all the hammers that have already fallen. One night, as you sit by the fire, a Confederate prisoner is brought in, a boy no older than your brother. His uniform is torn, his face streaked with soot. He sits across from you, silent. You offer him a piece of hardtack. He hesitates, then takes it. For a moment, you both eat in silence, the fire snapping between you. Then he looks up and says, "Do you think God's still watching all this?" You don't answer. You only look at the flames, watching them lick the air like tongues searching for mercy. You march through Virginia mud that smells of rot and iron. Every town you pass looks the same. Churches burned, wells poisoned, children staring from doorways with eyes too old for their faces. You begin to understand that victory will not look like triumph. It will look like exhaustion. That winter, you are stationed near a small crossroads called Cold Harbor. The fighting there is short and savage. In less than an hour, thousands fall. You survive only because the bullet meant for you lodges in the stock of your rifle. When night comes, the wounded lie between the lines, crying for water, for mothers, for God. You hear them all night long, and when dawn rises, the cries stop, replaced by crows. You write in your journal, though your hands tremble, "I think the war is tired of itself." But amid the ruin, something stubborn begins to grow. Not hope exactly, but endurance. You see it in the freedmen building schools beside broken plantations, in the nurses who keep tending even when their hands shake, in the soldiers who still share their last biscuit with a stranger. When the news comes that Lincoln has visited the front, you picture his weary face, the deep lines around his eyes. He walks among the tents, silent, nodding to each man as if apologizing for the burden he's laid upon them. You do not meet him, but you feel his presence like a prayer carried on the wind. You realize he, too, is trapped in this vast machinery of suffering. A man trying to guide a river made of blood back into its banks. The war rolls on into 1864. You no longer count the months, only the graves. But somewhere deep within you, beyond fatigue and grief, there's a faint pulse, something that feels almost like belief. You don't know if it's in victory, or forgiveness, or simply the idea that all this pain must mean something more than itself. You look up at the sky, wide, indifferent, eternal, and whisper to no one, "Let this be the last night of killing." But you know it won't be. Not yet. You have been marching for weeks, Georgia dust grinding into your boots, sun burning the back of your neck. The army moves like a slow storm under General Sherman, leaving a wake of silence behind it. The towns you pass are empty, fields smolder, wells are poisoned, chickens scatter before the drums. You used to count miles by the sound of the bugle. Now you count them by the smell of smoke. Every road feels the same, scorched earth, broken fences, a horizon painted in ash. You tell yourself it's for the Union, for the end of slavery, for the rebirth of the nation. But at night, when the firelight flickers across the faces of the men, you wonder if this is what justice looks like. A long, relentless burning that leaves nothing untouched. When you reach a town called Griswoldville, the sky is already bleeding red. Sherman's men move like shadows through the streets, axes flashing, torches rising. The houses go up one by one, timbers crackling like kindling bones. You see a woman standing in a doorway, a child in her arms, her face blank as stone. You want to say something, an apology, maybe, but your voice is gone. The flames roar too loud to leave room for words. Later, when the wind shifts, the fire spreads to the church. You see the steeple bend and collapse, bells crashing in a shower of sparks. Someone cheers, someone else crosses himself. You stare at the ruin and feel neither pride nor guilt, only a hollow that grows deeper each mile you march. You are a nurse again, this time near Atlanta. The air hums with flies and the faint moans of men too weak to scream. You clean their wounds with water that smells of rust. You burn your fingers on lanterns that flicker in the humid dark. Outside, artillery booms, steady, unending. Inside, you learn to work without looking at faces. It's easier that way. You listen for breathing instead. Each exhale is a victory. At night, you dream of home, but wake to cannon fire. You keep a small notebook where you write their names. Samuel, James, Henry, unknown. The pages blur from sweat. When you close the book, you whisper a prayer for each one, even those who never spoke your language. You have stopped asking who is right. You only ask who is left. Now you are someone else, a Confederate soldier, retreating through pine forests where the air tastes of smoke and sap. Your regiment is gone. Your boots are gone. You march barefoot, clutching a photograph of your wife and 2 sons. The youngest was born while you were away. You've never seen him except in this small, faded image. You tell yourself you are fighting for home, but home no longer exists. When you finally reach what used to be your farm, the chimney stands like a black tooth against the sky. The fields are nothing but ash. The corn you planted last spring never rose. You kneel in the dirt, pick up a handful of soil, and let it fall through your fingers. You are not sure whether you are burying something or uncovering it. When Sherman's army reaches Atlanta, the city burns for days. The air is thick with soot and grief. Windows melt. Horses panic. Smoke rolls down the streets like fog from another world. You march through the ruins, the soles of your boots sticking to the tar. Every step sounds like a heartbeat in the hollow chest of the city. The men joke, but their laughter has no edge. You realize that war has eaten its own meaning. What began as cause or vengeance has become pure emotion. The fire is not victory. It is gravity. Far to the north, in Washington, President Lincoln sits alone beneath a flickering lamp. He reads the casualty lists until the letters blur. His hands tremble as he folds them, one over the other. He has aged 20 years in 4. Every line on his face is a road that leads to some battlefield he will never see, some child he will never meet. He whispers scripture under his breath, with malice toward none, with charity for all. But even scripture sounds hollow when spoken to empty air. You imagine him staring at a map, tracing his finger from Richmond to Atlanta, from Gettysburg to Vicksburg, every dot a wound on the same body. You wonder if he feels what you feel, that the nation has become a single bleeding thing. By December, you reach Savannah. The war feels endless, like a fever that refuses to break. The air smells of salt and rain. You build no fires now. You've seen too many towns catch light. When the telegraph comes, Savannah is ours, and men cheer weakly. You sit apart, staring at the sea. The waves move in slow gray rhythm, indifferent to victory or loss. You think of all the places that no longer exist, all the faces that will never return, and you realize that peace will not feel like triumph. It will feel like an echo, something you hear long after the sound is gone. The new year begins with snow over Richmond. The Confederacy is unraveling. You see families dragging what's left of their lives in carts. Soldiers without boots walk barefoot through slush. The once proud city smells of smoke and hunger. You pass a man feeding a fire with pages from a Bible. "Paper's all I've got," he mutters. You nod because you understand. Belief has become a kind of luxury now. Above the city, the sky glows orange. You realize the fire that began at Fort Sumter has finally reached the heart. Then, one April morning, word spreads like wind through camp. Lee has surrendered. Appomattox Courthouse, a small place, almost nothing on the map, but you will remember it forever. You are there when the two generals meet. The room smells of ink and dust and quiet. Grant stands awkwardly in his mud-stained uniform. Lee's gloves are spotless. They speak softly, like men ashamed of the noise they have made. When it is done, no one cheers. You step outside and hear only birds. The world feels too still, too fragile. The war has ended, but the silence it leaves behind feels heavier than cannon smoke. You walk through the fields days later and see how the land begins to reclaim what was stolen. Grass pushes through cracks in cannon wheels. Wildflowers bloom where bodies once lay. The smell of spring returns, tentative and shy. You bend down and touch the soil. It feels alive again. For the first time in years, you allow yourself to hope, not in victory, not even in forgiveness, but in the simple miracle of survival. You whisper into the wind, "Let the land heal what the men have broken." And as the sun sinks behind the hills, you realize that though the fire has burned through everything, cities, families, faith, something remains. Not glory, not righteousness, but memory. The heart still burns, but now it burns for the living. You walk home under a sky that no longer knows the sound of guns. The air is warm again, heavy with the scent of rain and turned soil. You follow roads that twist through the wounded land, past burnt fences, collapsed barns, fields that look like old scars. Every mile feels quieter than the one before. The war has ended, they say, but you have seen enough to know that endings are not clean. The dead do not rise, and the living do not forget. You carry both with you, each step a soft echo of a march that no longer has music. When you reach your home, the house stands smaller than you remember. The porch leans. The well is dry. Your sister opens the door, and for a moment, she doesn't recognize you. Then she does, and her cry is half joy, half disbelief. You sit together in silence, because words have grown thin. You speak of small things, planting, the roof, the neighbor's ox, anything but the war. It sits between you like a ghost, invisible but heavy. That night, when you lie in your old bed, the ticking of the clock sounds like distant gunfire. You close your eyes and whisper to yourself that it's only the wind. Elsewhere, a different dawn breaks. You are a freedman now, standing in the same fields where you once labored under the overseer's whip. The soil is still the same, dark, stubborn, but it belongs to no master now. You hold a book, the first one you've ever owned. The letters blur sometimes, but you keep tracing them, whispering the sounds like prayers. Around you, others are building something new. A school, a church, a promise. The world is unsteady, but it is changing. Sometimes, when you look east and see the sun rising over the cotton rows, you think of those who did not live to see this day. You say their names softly, letting them drift into the air like seeds. Not everyone welcomes the dawn. You are a woman in black, sitting on the steps of what used to be your house. The walls are gone, the roof collapsed, the magnolia tree split in half by lightning. In your hands, you hold a letter written in gray ink, the last one your husband sent before Petersburg fell. You read it every morning, though the paper has begun to tear at the folds. His words speak of honor, duty, faith. But the war that took him also took the meaning of those words. You close the letter and stare at the road, half hoping he might still walk up it, half knowing he never will. In April, the nation gasps again. Lincoln is dead, shot in a theater, of all places, on a Good Friday. The streets of Washington fill with mourning. Black crepe drapes the windows. Bells toll until the sound feels like a wound that cannot close. You stand among the crowd, watching his coffin pass beneath a rain of white petals. The faces around you are blurred by tears and disbelief. It feels as though the very air has stopped moving. Someone near you whispers, He freed the slaves, and they killed him for it. You cannot tell whether it was a prayer or a curse. That night you look at the darkened windows of the White House and feel the same silence that once followed every battle. That unbearable hush when the guns fall quiet, and the heart keeps beating unsure what to do next. Months later, news spreads through the South again, not of war, but of law. The 13th Amendment has passed. Slavery is over, everywhere, in word and in writing. You stand among a crowd beneath an old oak tree as someone reads the news aloud. No one cheers at first. The silence feels sacred. Then, slowly, hands rise, trembling, reaching for the air itself, as if freedom were something you could finally touch. A man beside you whispers, "Now we begin." And you realize that for some, the war's end is only the beginning of another kind of struggle. The fight to live as equals in a world still learning what equality means. You are someone else now. A former soldier, gray uniform faded to rags, hoeing the same soil you once fought to defend. Your children are thin but alive. The corn rises unevenly, but it rises. You work from dawn to dusk, not for glory, but for survival. You no longer speak of causes. You no longer speak of sides. When your neighbor, once an enemy, passes by, you nod to him and keep working. That is how peace begins, not with speeches, but with silence shared between men too tired to hate. Across the South, towns begin to rebuild. Schools open where stables once stood. Churches rise from ash. Bridges span rivers that once ran red. The scars remain, but so does the will to mend. You see a Union soldier helping an old woman lift a beam. You see a freed girl planting flowers in the cracks of a burned church wall. You see small acts that mean more than any victory parade. The nation breathes again, painfully, unevenly, but it breathes. Years pass. The guns rust. The uniforms rot. The graves fill with grass. The war slips into memory. Not gone, only quieter. You grow older, but sometimes in the stillness before rain, you hear it again. The distant thunder of cannons. The cries of men calling to brothers they could not see through the smoke. You feel it in the pulse of the country itself. A heartbeat scarred, but still beating. You know now that history does not end. It lingers like a shadow cast by firelight, stretching long after the flame has gone. You stand in a field at dusk, the horizon wide and trembling. The wind moves through the grass like breath, whispering names you thought you'd forgotten. You close your eyes and listen. And though the years have buried the war, you understand at last that its echo was never meant to fade. It was meant to remind.